Welcome to the Lost Boys that Found Fathers podcast. I'm Gabriel O'Sullivan, and joining me is my co-host Will Haycox. We are men who have suffered the loss of a child, and through this production we desire to offer encouragement, strength, and hope to our fellow brothers who have traveled the same journey. Welcome for episode 4 here today of Intentional Fatherhood, and I'm going to turn it over to Will.
Thank you, sir. Good morning, Gabe. Good morning, everybody else out there. So real quickly, we have recorded 3 episodes of this already, hence this is episode 4. So we're talking about being intentional fathers. We're talking about just providing some practical tips for what it looks like to be a biblical father, an involved father, a loving father, and ultimately, walking out our faith and being a model of, or following the model that God provided for us and the way He loves us. So the first episode we discussed just kind of the biblical perspective on fatherhood and talked about some examples of fathers in the Bible and some good and bad. The second episode we talked about prioritizing our quality time with our family, and third episode we discussed leading by example, modeling love, living responsibly, using our authority to lead the family well. And we kind of explored the concept of leaving a legacy with our love of our children and the way we follow Christ. So the next thing we want to talk about is creating some meaningful traditions for our family. I know just right off the top, there's things that I did with my family that I didn't think a whole lot about when I was a kid, but really made an influence on my faith, on just who I was, how I grew up, how I see things. Every family has traditions, whether they're good things or bad things. And I think one thing that just comes to the top of my mind is for our Christmas Eve traditions when I was a kid, we would always go to a different church. I'm not sure when it started, when I was probably early elementary age. We're Southern Baptists. We would go to a Catholic church for Christmas Eve, or we would go to Lutheran church, or we'd go to a Presbyterian church, or we would go to Methodist church or something, just to kind of experience what different faith traditions did for Christmas Eve. And when we were really little, it was kind of just all right, this is weird. I remember we went to a Catholic church, and my parents neglected to tell me that when we were sitting down in the front, we were coming through the line and taking a sip out of this cup, that it was wine and not grape juice. So they probably thought I was possessed by a demon, because I think the way I remember it, I took a sip and went, "What is this?" So they probably were like trying to exorcise me after that. But so that was really neat, and I just mentioned that because I don't know what my parents' thoughts were on that. If it was just let's do something different, let's make this part of our tradition. But looking back on it, that small tradition of going to a different church once a year just for Christmas Eve gave me an early perspective that everyone celebrates Christmas Eve differently than we do. There's different ways to celebrate the birth of Christ and to prepare your heart for the real meaning of Christmas and all of that. And so that's kind of what we're talking about here, is just establishing some family traditions that reinforce our values. Before I jump into practical things, you got any comments there, Gabe?
I was just say something that just kind of hit me while you were talking was like just this past week, like we were about to put our little one to bed. Tyson, he's 7 now, and he was like, "Daddy, can we have everybody come in my room and do a family devotion?" And I was like, "Yes, we can, son." It was like one of those where I'm like tired and just trying to think about getting him into bed, so I can get on to the next thing or whatever. But he was like, he's the one that kind of called me out on it. It was like, let's get everybody together and have a family devotion, So I'm like, all right, so we called in the other 2 and my wife, of course, and we sat down and, like typically when we do that, like Avery, our daughter, is very musically inclined and she loves music, so we'll have her, like lead a little quick song, and then you have Isaac pray or something, then we'll read a devotion or something like that. I wish I could say we did that every day, or that even we did that every week, but we don't. It's not as consistent as it needs to be. and I'll take responsibility for that. But the fact that I guess we do it and do that enough, right, in order to have that kind of cemented in that little 7-year-old mind of like, hey, this is something that's cool and that I like, and it's tradition that we do at our family. So yeah, that's something that we do, and I want to do it more often, because I think it matters. And, so yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean that's kind of the first thing I was going to go with, and I'm right there in the same boat with you that we've bought our kids are 3.5 and almost, well, yeah, it is 5 months now. So we don't have, as I guess we have one that knows what we're doing.
Yeah,
the other,
right.
he doesn't quite understand yet. But I'm in the same boat where we've bought some little kid, 3-year-old preschool devotional books and little like kids Bibles and stuff like that with the stories and the pictures. And we've started doing that. We've made the effort, like we're going to do it every night or 4 nights a week or something, and we'll do it 2 nights a week, and then we'll get busy and we're tired, and I got to be up at 6 o'clock in the morning or 5:30 or something, and so I'm just like you said, go to bed, kid, it's time.
Yeah.
So there's definitely room to grow there, but I mean, when I think back, I'm gonna talk about what we should do and talk about childhood. When I think back, we always had some sort of reading time, but it wasn't necessarily always Bible study. But I remember like a lot of the books that both my parents read to me, but I guess like as I got older, I remember my dad reading to me adventure books, and so like he read Chronicles of Narnia to us. He read, I believe he got through all of the Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit.
Wow.
He read like this. There was a series called Cooper Kids, was like a Christian take on Indiana Jones, basically. And so there's like these adventure books, and I'm big into fantasy and sci-fi and any sort of adventure gaming or anything like that. Even though I don't have time to play games anymore, I still enjoy the story. And I think that kind of got my mind going in that direction of that creativity, that imagination, like spending that time with my parents, building that relationship. They were teaching me something. I'm like a lot of kids, I'm asking a question, what does this mean? What is that about? Talking about, whatever, what is magic, when they talk about magic in Narnia or something, and asking those questions and having the opportunities for discussion. I think even if you're not doing an intentional Bible study every night, you're spending time with your kids, they're going to reflect back on that and be like, hey, Dad took time to read to me every night, 3 nights a week, whatever you can manage. And growing up, my dad was out of town a lot, so it was only a certain number of nights a week. But that's what we're encouraging you to do here, is to set aside some time every night, 5 nights a week, 2 nights a week, whatever you have time to do and what you can fit into your schedule, to be with your kids. Yes, the ideal thing would be to do a Bible study, some sort of Bible reading. You can go through, there's tons of plans. Our church at the Mill, puts out Bible plans just about every quarter, probably, maybe even more than that. When you go into Easter season, Christmas season, all these different times, they put out Bible reading plans. You can get them online. You can get them a lot of different places. And then you can just go to the YouVersion Bible app, and there's all sorts of plans. You can search for Advent, for Easter, for summer reading plan, for elementary school kids, whatever it is. There's tons of resources out there that we could maybe put something up in our show notes.
Yeah,
but
I'll do that. I'll put that on.
Yeah, so we could put something in the show notes for the resources that our church provides. But don't feel like you're handicapped by, well, I'd love to read the Bible to my kids, but where do I start? Do I start in Leviticus? Probably not, but so Leviticus is good. There's a lot of great stuff in there. Probably not where to start with your preschooler. But I mean, there's a lot of different places. There's tons of different children's Bibles and things you can jump into there. But I think that's probably a baseline, and maybe I'll let you jump in here too, Gabe. But I think that's a very easy thing to do. You can, depending on the age of your kids, their maturity level, your life schedule, whether you're working first shift, third shift, whatever, swing schedule, finding 5 to 15 minutes every day or 3 days a week, and just reading something to your kids. It can be you read 3 verses and you sit and talk, or you can read a whole chapter. You can read, I wouldn't say my dad read us like non-Christian stuff a whole lot. It was all Narnia's Christian allegory. Lord of the Rings, you can maybe stretch and say it's allegorical.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of different things like that you're building a relationship with your kids, and you're establishing yourself as, I don't know if an authority is maybe the right word, but a source of knowledge and someone that can answer questions when you're reading, and you're growing their imagination and their vocabulary and everything else.
I think that's a great idea. And, I think back to my childhood, and I remember my mom would read, Dr. Seuss or whatever, with me, like Go Dog Go and this kind of thing right before bed as a kid. And then
Green
until I
Eggs
was like
and
17, no, I'm just kidding.
Yeah,
but,
probably,
once I learned to read, then it's like that pattern was established of, hey, let's read something before bed. And once I kind of graduated from, this elementary, these elementary books, I don't, for whatever reason, like I remember like as a kid, like starting to read the Bible before bed, and again, like you said, some of it you read and you're like, what did I just read? Especially when I had just had the KJV, around. I'm like, man, I don't know what in the world I just read right here, but it was like, it was
no
this
study
pattern,
Bible
right?
or anything back then.
Yeah, and then it was and his word was getting kind of built up and established in my heart. And this was before I even, knew the Lord, before I was even a Christian. But like those patterns were set, and that was, again, I give credit to, to Mom for establishing that with me. So I think that's a great idea, Will. Yeah, for sure.
So we could spend a whole podcast on the importance of reading and having that with your kids. But moving on to the next thing, I think something that may not be able to happen every night, but you should find rhythms and patterns, is to be able to volunteer with your family, because you are being active in sitting down and reading with your kids. But if you are taking your faith and putting it into action by volunteering, you could volunteer. There's tons of different ways. We could put that in show notes too, or we could at least put a link to the church website where we could get you there. But there's homeless shelters you could volunteer to help or to give out food. You could do Meals on Wheels or mobile meals. You could just know a neighbor or a family member who needs their grass cut or needs someone to go to the grocery store for them, or anything. I mean, there's tons of different things that you could think of if you sit down for 5 minutes with your spouse and think, what could we do? There's something you could bless someone. And if you don't know of anybody, one, you should probably fix that. But go to your church, and whether you go to a larger church like we do or a smaller church, ask the pastors, who needs something? How could I bless the church? How could I bless the community? And the point we're getting back to here is you're showing your kids, like, we can sit home and we can read about Bible stories. We can read about God blessing someone, and we can read about the miracles that Jesus has done. And that's all good. And that's all, it is building up, like you just said, the knowledge of the Lord within you and filling your heart with His Word. But what do we do with it? And having that opportunity to step out and actually give someone some food that's sitting on the side of the road with a sign, to actually wash someone's, clean someone's front porch off with a pressure washer, to actually go and clean out somebody's gutters, depending on the ages of your kids, to take food to someone with mobile meals, and to have your kids see someone in need. In this scenario I'm reading here, you're better equipped. You have some financial flexibility where you can drive around the car and give them food, and they don't have that option. So you're showing your kids, when we have something, someone else doesn't have it, we're willing to give. We're willing to take time out of our day, one Saturday a month, and we're going and blessing someone else with it. And you're putting your faith in action, and you're giving the kids a chance. It's just like the idea of, when you have your kids in the worship service with you, you don't want to be the dad with your hands in your pockets, mumbling, "How great thou art." Like, you need to be with your hands up, or at least you need to be engaged. You need to be speaking the word of God. You need to be praising. You need to be an example and showing your family, I may not be the most musically inclined, but I'm going to show my kids that it matters to worship the Lord. And by the same token, if you talk about helping people and how Jesus healed and provided food for people when he broke the bread and the fish and never help anybody, and you drive past all the homeless guys on the side of the road and they look miserable and all of that, you're going to just roll the window down and give them a $2 or $1 bill or a couple dollars. That's not showing the same love of Christ that you've been discussing with your kids, and taking that time, whatever fits in your schedule, once a month or something, once a quarter, and making sure all your kids are with you and everyone's living out your faith at the same time. I think that will make a huge impact.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I love the idea of establishing the routine of service. And I think too, what that teaches our kids is like, this life is not just about you, right? This life is not just about your enjoyment and your play and your fun. Like, yes, there has to be parts of that in our lives because God gives us the opportunity to enjoy life and to do fun things, but we need to teach them how to serve as well. So that's a great idea. And again, setting it as a tradition, so that way when they get older, they'll be able to pass that down, right? We're talking about creating generational change here, or establishing traditions to impact future generations, and that's a great way to do it right there. Good idea.
So then moving forward real quick in this episode, we want to also discussing the significance of these rituals, these family traditions with your family. And the idea is, you can discuss this with your wife, bring her along. Maybe she's already well beyond you and she's already got all these plans for things she wants to do with the family, and you're the lazy father who just hasn't carried them out. If that's the case, fix that. Have some conversations with your wife. But just wanting to throw out there, do these things, but explain why you're doing them. Like, it's like the idea of bringing the Bible to life to your kids, like we were just discussing here. When you're serving someone else, you don't have to serve them, like the whole idea of like, don't let the right hand know what the left hand is doing. You don't want to do that with your kids. If your kids are the right hand, you want to tell them what the left hand is doing and explain to them, this is why we're taking our Saturday morning where we could all be sitting around watching cartoons and I can be cutting the grass and getting things done and fixing up our own house. This is why we're sacrificing 2 to 4 hours of our weekend, because Christ loved us and has given so much to us. God has blessed us to have X, Y, and Z. We want to go out. We want to give that to others. We want to give some of our time back to the Lord. We're tithing, and this is the money we're tithing. This is why we tithe, not because if we don't tithe, then someone at the church is going to see it and they're going to think poorly of us as a family and we're going to get a bad reputation. But no, we tithe because everything we got came from the Lord, and it's a blessing from the Lord that we're able to have the house we have and the cars and the nice thing we have. And so we want to turn that around, give it back to the church so that they can use it in a way that honors the Lord, builds up the community and missions and everything else. So I think the importance of actually having these conversations and explaining to your kids what you're doing is just as big of a point. And this is at age appropriate. I mean, at 3.5, I can't tell my daughter, we're going to give money to the church because it really honors God and we're giving back what he's given us, and explain stewardship to her. She doesn't understand that, but you can say, God gave us some money, we're going to give it back to him. There's age appropriate ways to explain this shut-in, this old lady, can't get to church, so we're going to go see her and we're just going to talk to her for 10 minutes and just be nice to her. Like, there's lots of ways you can explain that to a 3-year-old, and you can explain it to a 17-year-old differently. So use that in your own context. But I think the idea of walking out your faith through acts of service, taking time to be intentional with reading, and really with just spending time with your kids at night or in the morning, whatever works for your family, and then discussing that. I think those are some quick practical steps, and there's probably 50 more that I didn't think of or didn't throw in here, but those are just some things coming from my own experience that I would encourage you to do and to kind of put up some of these guardrails and kind of steer your family with these traditions. And like you said, Gabe, we're looking to not only impact our kids now who are 3 or 10 or 15, but to give them a framework that they can go out into the world, and whether the Lord gets to them quickly and they're already believers before they leave our house, or whether they like to wander like I did and do their own thing for a while, they'll have this in the back of their mind that mom and dad did this. They prioritized reading the Bible every night. Why? And whether they remember the reasons you told them or not, eventually the Lord can use that and bring them back around to, hey, when I was 7, I remember my dad read me this story, and hopefully they don't, but maybe they hit rock bottom one day, and that's what the Lord uses to bring them back around. Is mom and dad really cared about this Christianity stuff. I don't know what the whole deal is. I don't go to church anymore, but they thought there was something to it. I have nowhere else to turn. This is what I'm coming back to. So that's a worst case scenario, hopefully, of your children's future. But what you're doing is it's almost like you're raising the floor on the, there's the whole idea of, the ceiling of an athlete and the floor of an athlete. And if you're building up this tradition, it's like you're raising up the floor that if your kids leave your home and they never go to church again, you're building up this biblical base that they can start with, that the Lord can then use to turn them back to Him.
I love it, man. And this is, what you're talking about is biblical. We see, like, even in the Old Testament where, like, you would have these festivals, that God set up and establishes, and when the reason for that was to look back at God's faithfulness, and for the adults to, like, recount to their children and grandchildren about all the amazing things that God had done for them. So, like, pointing back to, we're doing this because God's been so good to us. And so that's what we're talking about doing. We're talking about giving back. We're talking about setting up these traditions to honor the Lord because of how good He's been to us too. And we think about Proverbs, train up a child in the way he should go, and when he's old, he will not depart from it. And so what we're saying is, hey, let's, again, put this training in while these kids are younger, so that way when they get older, they've got this base to go back to, right? And so I think there's certainly different ways to look at that verse, but yeah, I love what you're saying. It's all about being intentional, which is the whole name of this series right here, right? It's we can't just allow life to happen to us. We have to happen to life. Yeah. And certainly when it's involving our children, because the world is coming after them in a negative way. The world does not want them to have a positive spiritual impact. The world does not want them to follow Christ, right? So we've got to be on the front lines, like fighting off evil and trying to establish these good and holy and righteous, traditions and practices. And again, not because those things save us or because God looks on us and gives us some kind of kudos for that. That's not what we're saying. We're saved by grace through faith alone. That's it. But out of that grace and out of that faith that we're now living in, now we want to give back to the Lord a little bit of what He's given to us. And that comes with being intentional with our time with our kids. So.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so thank y'all for joining us today. We're going to continue this series with an episode 5 here in a couple of weeks, so make sure you stay connected and check that out. If you hadn't listened to the previous episodes, go back and listen to them. Certainly we go back several years now, about 80 episodes in. So again, thank y'all for joining us today. Make sure that you follow Lost Boys to Found Fathers on Facebook, Instagram, and X. You can also look for my books, Thy Will Be Done, and Every Little Thing, 6 Small Steps to Perfect Peace. You can find those on Amazon and other places books are sold. So thanks for joining us today. Again, let's not be lost. Let's make sure we're found in Him.